Hello, this is a perimeter review, and we're reviewing information we talked about last lesson as well as past information you've probably learned in 5th and 6th grade. When we're asked to find perimeter, we add all sides together. We do not need a formula. If you have read these directions, circle the word add and put a star at the end of the sentence. And I want to let you know that I occasionally do that to check that you're truly reading all of what we're doing. So we're going to circle those two words add, and we're going to put a star at the end of the sentence to let us know that we've read the directions. So I'll be looking for that as we proceed with other future lessons. Now, we mentioned a formula, and we will come back and talk about that. If you recall, the square has a formula and the rectangle has a formula. We don't necessarily have to use it, but some of you might gravitate towards that naturally. We're going to find the perimeter of the following rectangle, and we're going to be asked to show our work. So when we're working with perimeter, we represent it with a capital P, and then we're going to show that we're adding the sides. And this is one of the most common errors I see, is that students will stop here. And that's because we just register 2 numbers. However, there are 4 sides. And so one of the ways we can tell, or that was sometimes it's notated, is in geometry we sometimes put little hash marks so that we know that both of those sides have exactly the same measurement. We don't have to necessarily write 6.7, but we can. That denotes that these are both the same measurement. And then so that we know that this side is different from this side, then we would use 2 hash marks, but we want to let our reader know, the notation would be to put 2 hash marks so that we are saying that this is the same measurement as well. So we're going to write that 15 1/10. So what we need to do is to continue on by adding all the sides, going all the way around the rectangle. So now we have every side represented, 4 sides, and there's 4 numbers there. So would you please pause, use your calculator, and add those together. And you should have that perimeter equals 43 6/10. Now some of you may have chosen to do this a different way. And the formula we mentioned would be that the fact that there's 2 lengths and there's 2 widths. And generally I choose to write L's in cursive when we're dealing with this so it doesn't look like a 1. So some of you may have decided, instead of adding them together, well, you were going to take double up, or take 2 times the length, and do the same thing with the width, and you would get the same answer. And this would be 13 4/10. This would be 30 2/10, and that's, if we add those together, it is 43 6/10. Now, another student mentioned that they prefer to take 2 times this quantity, 6 7/10 plus 15 1/10. And that would be 2 times 21 8/10, which would also lead us to 43 6/10. And you can see there's numerous ways to do this. And so you can always rely, if you're confused, you can always go back to the fact that perimeter is just adding all the side lengths together. So let's look at the second one. I'm going to ask you to do this on your own, but before we do, I want to recall and review that if we had a figure with different sides, well, this would get 1 hash mark. There's nothing like it. So the next side would get 2 hash marks. And since this third measurement is different, it would get 3. That's stating to us, before we even look at the measurements, that all 3 of these sides are different lengths. So would you please find the perimeter of this triangle? And look back when you're done. And after we add this all sides together, we should have 37 6/10. And by the way, I'm not very happy with myself. I didn't show the unit of measure in our last one. So when we're given a unit of measure, in this case it's centimeters, we should write it. And so we're going to look back up at our previous problem. There should be inches. So we should also include inches. We want to acknowledge our unit of measure. Let's go on to the back side now, please. So our next problem, sometimes they give us questions that are in word form without the figure or the shape that we see. So let's read what we have here. Find the perimeter of a square that has a side length of 7 feet. Draw a picture and label the sides. Be sure to show your work. So let's highlight what's important information here. They want to know the perimeter. We're talking about a square. The side length is 7 feet. We're asked to draw a picture and label the sides, and they want us to show our work. So we're going to start by drawing a picture of a square. Remember, a square has 4 equal sides and 4 right angles. And we're going to label the side length. So now you have choices. You could put 7 feet on each side if you prefer, or now that we've talked about those hash marks, you could denote that these are all 7 feet by showing that little hash mark, meaning that all sides are 7 feet. So next we're going to choose, you're going to choose whether you want to write perimeter by adding up all the sides, or you may know as you see this that there's another way to do it. And this is one that has a formula that we talked about. Because the square is unique, because all sides are the same, and you can clearly see I wrote 7 times, or wrote 7s 4 times being added, which would be the same thing as multiplying by 4. So we could instead, if you prefer, and some of you again might naturally have used this formula, meaning you took 4 times 7. So the answer to this is the perimeter is 28, and we're going to acknowledge those feet. So I'd like you to complete 4 and 5 on your own, but we are going to continue with the second half of this lesson. And by the way, when we're in person learning, you'll be given time to go ahead and do 4 and 5. As we continue with this lesson, I want you to know what we're doing, what the next thing we're doing now is really what the 7th grade material is regarding perimeter. There's all sorts of things we can do now that we have some algebra skills under our belt, besides just add the sides together. So we're going to skip number 1, but I'd like you to go over to number 2. And before I start, I just want to let you know that we often write a perimeter, our area, our volume first, and then we write whatever the answer is behind it. However, we wouldn't have to write that. We could, instead of saying perimeter was 10, we could say 10 equals the perimeter, and it means the same thing. So that is going to come into play in just a minute. So as we look at this, I can tell that we have a side of 9, 12, but the third side, there's a variable, and we want to know what that is. And as long as they tell us the perimeter, we're going to be able to figure this out. So I'm going to start by adding the sides together. I'm going to start with the unknown and cross it off because I've accounted for it. Now I'm going to go to the 12. I'm also going to check that off my list, and then I'm going to acknowledge the 9. So I've covered all 3 sides, and together they equal 36. They've told us the perimeter, in fact 36 yards. So now, if you recall, we have gathered up like terms before. There's not a y, but I have 2 constants. So the y is going to be by itself. There's no other y terms to gather up, but I have 12, and I have the number 9, and those can be combined to make 21. And altogether, that still equals 36. Now, we're going to solve this one-step equation. Y plus 21 is 36. So we want to isolate y, or get y by itself, because we want to know what y equals. And we do that by doing the inverse operation of what we see. Since we see adding 21, we're going to subtract 21 on both sides. And that's going to give us y equals 15. Now once again, I know that you could have found this a different way, but we want to review and find applications of our solving skills. Now let's go on to the next problem. So we can see we're given a triangle again. We have one side is the variable d, this side is 10, and you may have noticed there's not a number here. However, if you recall what this hashtag means, it's telling us that this measures the same as this. So we now know that this side is also 10 inches. And by the way, this is known as an isosceles triangle when two sides are the same measurement. So we're going to do exactly what we did last time. We're going to put 10 plus 10, I'm acknowledging two sides, plus D, and it doesn't matter what order we put the numbers or variables, we're adding up. Commutative property tells me that. And together the perimeter, all those sides, add up to 27 inches. So now we're going to gather our like terms. We have 10 plus another 10 is 20. And there aren't any other like terms to gather up with D, so we're just going to drop it down, and that still equals 27. Now, if you're not happy seeing this written in this form, we could take 20D, and we could put D first and 20 second. As long as this is adding, the commutative property says I can move them, and order doesn't matter. So if you'd rather solve it this way, we can. However, I do want you to know that we can solve it as is. So I'm going to build our wall. We're going to take away 20 so we can isolate D. We've eliminated 20. And D, because there's a plus sign in front of it, I can drop this down as a positive D. I don't have to show the plus sign. We'll use that as a positive sign. 27 minus 20 is 7. So that means D is 7 inches. And if we added all those measurements together, we would indeed get our 27 that it said it was. So let's look at our final figure. We're going to find the perimeter, or actually we're going to find the value of V because they've already given us the perimeter. So this one is a little bit more challenging, but not terrible. It's kind of fun, I think, to solve these. We want to know the value of V. So we can start and go all the way around the perimeter with what they've given us. So I see V is one of the sides, and then 7 plus 7 plus V plus 10, and all together that should equal 45 kilometers. That's the perimeter all the way around. So now I'm going to gather up like terms. Well, I see a V here, and I'm going to choose to put the number 1 in front of it, and I have a V here. And the reason I want to put the 1, that's a coefficient of 1, it doesn't affect the value. 1 times V is still V. But now I can gather these up, and my brain understands that there's 1V plus another V. 1 plus 1 would be 2V. And now I want to gather up my constants, numbers. The constants are numbers, so I'm going to gather those up. 7 plus 10 is going to give me positive or plus 17. And all together, that should equal 45. So now we're ready to solve. And if you recall, we want to undo operations, and so we're kind of using the order of operations backward. We're trying to undo what we see. And our common inclination is to start with what we see first, but we want to undo addition and subtraction, and what's being added or subtracted is the 17. It's the constant. We always go after the constant first. So now eliminated 17 by subtracting on both sides, and 2V is left over, so I'm going to drop that down. 45 minus 17 would be 28. Now I want to eliminate 2, and it's hooked together with the V through multiplication. Side by side is multiplied. So to undo that, we're going to divide by 2, but we have to do it on both sides of the equation. So this is our first step. This is our second step. So this is a 2-step equation. We've eliminated the 2 because 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 1 times V is V. 28 divided by 2 is 14. Let's look back at the unit of measure. So 14 kilometers. So both of these sides would be 14 kilometers. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.